I walked into the conference room expecting coffee and maybe a handshake. 7 years at the company deserved at least that much. Instead, I froze in the doorway. A woman I'd never seen before sat in my usual seat next to Dan, my boss. Her laptop was open, and she looked completely comfortable, like she'd been there for months. Dan glanced up with that smug smile I'd learned to tolerate over the years. "Riley, meet the person who's going to change everything around here," he announced. The room went silent. My stomach dropped. Something was very wrong. I forced myself to step inside, pulling out a chair at the far end of the table. The woman smiled at me, friendly but calculated. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd walked into my own ambush. My 7-year anniversary suddenly felt like a setup, not a celebration. I glanced around at my coworkers, but no one would meet my eyes. Dan clapped his hands together, pulling everyone's attention to the front of the room. "Before we dive into business, let's acknowledge Riley's big day. 7 years with us." A few people clapped awkwardly, the sound thin and uncomfortable. Someone wheeled in a grocery store cake with my name spelled wrong. Riley, in crooked blue icing. I stared at it, feeling my cheeks burn with embarrassment. Dan cut a slice and kept talking, but not about me. "This is Kayla Price," he said, gesturing to the woman in my seat. "Our new operations lead." The words hit me like cold water. Operations lead. That was my title. That was my job. I looked around the table hoping someone would speak up, say this was a joke, but everyone avoided my eyes. Kayla leaned forward, extending her hand across the table with a warm smile. "It's so nice to finally meet you, Riley," she said. "Finally?" What did that mean? How long had she known about me? Dan continued without missing a beat, as if he hadn't just shattered my world. "Kayla's going to be taking the lead on operations moving forward. Riley, you'll help with the transition over the next few weeks." Help with the transition. I was being demoted in front of the entire team, disguised as some kind of mentorship or collaboration. My hands clenched under the table so hard my nails dug into my palms. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to ask why no one had the decency to tell me this privately, but my voice was stuck somewhere deep in my throat. People started gathering their things, eager to escape the suffocating tension in the room. As I stood to leave, Kayla appeared beside me like a shadow. "I'm really looking forward to working with you," she said quietly, her tone kind but her eyes sharp. Then it hit me. I'd seen her before. Not here in the office during normal business hours, but somewhere else. Somewhere she definitely shouldn't have been. The memory came rushing back. It was 3 weeks ago, late on a Thursday night. I'd stayed behind to finish a quarterly report, and the office was nearly empty. The lights were dimmed to save energy, and the halls were silent except for the steady hum of the air conditioning. I'd walked past one of the glass conference rooms and noticed someone inside. A woman I didn't recognize, sitting alone on a video call. Her laptop screen glowed with what looked like a presentation, and I could see logos, ours mixed with others I didn't recognize. She was talking animatedly, gesturing at her screen like she was in the middle of an important pitch. I paused outside the glass wall, curious about who would be here this late. But she was so focused on her call that she didn't notice me watching. I couldn't hear what she was saying through the thick glass, but something about the whole situation felt off. I'd told myself she was probably a BA consultant or a contractor working on a late-night project. But now, staring at Kayla in the conference room, I realized with absolute certainty that woman had been her. Another memory surfaced, this one even sharper and more disturbing. 2 weeks ago, we'd had a massive all-hands strategy meeting about Northway Grocers, a potential client worth millions to our company. The room had been filled with whiteboards covered in detailed timelines, budget projections, confidential vendor names, and pricing strategies. After the 3-hour meeting ended, I'd gone back to the room to grab my notebook that I'd accidentally left behind. That's when I saw her, Kayla, standing alone in front of the main whiteboard with her phone out, very clearly snapping photos of everything. She jumped when I walked in, her face flushing red. "Oh, I was just checking the weather," she'd said quickly, waving her phone in the air awkwardly. But I'd seen the camera app open on her screen. I'd seen the flash go off. I hadn't pushed it at the time because I didn't know who she was or what authority she had. I'd assumed maybe Dan had sent someone to document the session for people who couldn't attend. But now, knowing she was my replacement, the pieces were starting to fall into place in a very disturbing pattern. The next morning, I went straight to HR, hoping someone would help me make sense of what was happening. Dan was already there when I arrived, leaning casually against Fiona's desk like he owned the place. I tried to stay calm as I explained what had happened, the surprise announcement, the complete lack of communication, the fact that I was being replaced without any warning or explanation. Fiona, the HR manager, smiled tightly and folded her hands on her desk. "Riley, you're not being replaced. This is a shared leadership model. It's actually great for your professional development." I blinked, stunned by the corporate speak. Shared leadership? He called her the operations lead. That's my exact title. Fiona glanced at Dan, who shrugged with infuriating casualness. "You're taking this too personally," he said dismissively. "Kayla came highly recommended from some impressive places. She's got fresh energy and new ideas. You need to trust me on this." I wanted to mention the strange late-night video call, the whiteboard photos, the suspicious behavior. But without concrete proof, I knew I'd sound paranoid and jealous. So I swallowed my words, nodded, and left the office feeling smaller than I had in years. Later that afternoon, Kayla appeared at my desk holding 2 expensive coffees from the cafe downstairs. "Thought you could use this," she said with a warm, disarming smile. I took the cup cautiously, unsure how to respond to this sudden friendliness. She pulled up a chair next to me, and I began walking her through our client management systems, email protocols, and project tracking tools, trying my best to stay professional despite my growing unease. But as we talked, she started casually dropping very specific details about Northway Grocers, things I'd never mentioned to her or anyone outside our core team. "They've had issues with vendors before, right? Especially around bulk pricing and delivery schedules?" she asked as if it were common knowledge. I froze, my coffee halfway to my lips. That wasn't public information at all. We'd discussed those exact vendor issues in the closed strategy meeting, the very same one where I'd caught her photographing our whiteboard. "How do you know that?" I asked carefully, watching her face. She waved it off with a light laugh. "Oh, Dan must have mentioned it in one of our planning sessions." But I knew Dan didn't operate that way. He hoarded information and took credit for ideas. He didn't share operational details freely. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept racing through everything I'd witnessed, every strange moment that hadn't made sense until now. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the blue glow lighting up my dark apartment. I created a private document and titled it simply Kayla, Timeline and Evidence. I started listing everything chronologically. The night I saw her on that mysterious video call, the whiteboard photos, her impossibly specific comments about Northway's vendor history. Then I pulled up our company's shared access logs, something I had full permission to view as operations lead. My hands actually shook as I scrolled through recent file activity. Kayla's name appeared dozens and dozens of times, accessing sensitive files she had absolutely no business viewing. Financial projections, confidential client lists, strategic expansion plans, proprietary pricing models. I took careful screenshots of everything, labeling each one by date, time, and file name. I didn't know exactly what I was building yet, but every instinct told me I needed documented proof of what was happening. Just as I was about to close my laptop and try to get some sleep, a new email notification popped up on my screen. The subject line read, "Northway Pitch Deck, Restricted Access." I clicked it open. Only 2 names were listed as having full access, mine and Kayla's. 9 the next day, we gathered for an internal prep meeting about the Northway proposal. The conference room was packed with department heads and senior staff. Dan stood at the head of the long table, arms crossed over his chest, looking extremely proud of himself. "This client could literally double our annual revenue," he announced dramatically. "There will be substantial bonuses for everyone if we successfully land this contract." Then he turned to Kayla with an approving smile. Kayla's been bringing some incredibly innovative ideas to the table. Fresh perspective, sharp strategic instincts. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek to keep from reacting. Those fresh, innovative ideas were mine. I drafted the entire initial proposal framework 3 weeks ago before Kayla had even existed in this building. But now Dan was publicly giving her credit for my work, right in front of the entire leadership team. I stayed quiet, just watching and documenting everything mentally. During the meeting, I noticed something on my laptop screen, a shared document notification. Kayla had just sent an email containing the Northway pitch deck. I watched the timestamp. She'd sent our most sensitive, confidential proposal to herself, to a personal Gmail address, not her company email. My heart started pounding as I quickly took a screenshot before anyone else could notice what had just happened. I watched the shared document activity log in real time as Dan continued droning on about timelines and deliverables. Kayla had opened the complete pitch deck, downloaded the entire file to her local drive, and then forwarded it to an external email address. All within less than 2 minutes. And she was sitting right across the table from me, nodding thoughtfully along to Dan's presentation, acting completely innocent and engaged. I didn't say anything, not yet. I knew that without more evidence, without a clear pattern, I'd be dismissed as jealous or paranoid. Instead, I made a calculated decision right there in that meeting. I was going to set a trap. That evening, I stayed late at the office after everyone else had gone home. I created a carefully modified version of one of our operational planning documents. I inserted a completely fake detail, a fabricated vendor name, and an entirely false pricing structure that didn't exist anywhere in our real systems. It was subtle enough to look legitimate to someone who didn't know our operations intimately, but specific enough that I would instantly recognize it if it appeared anywhere else. I titled the file something official sounding and saved it in a shared network folder that I knew Kayla had been given access to. Then I waited, barely breathing. 2 days later, I checked the access logs again. Kayla had opened that exact file, and she had exported it to her personal drive. I felt genuinely cold as I stared at the proof on my screen. She had taken the bait completely. Now I just had to wait and see where my fake information would eventually surface. I didn't have to wait very long at all. Exactly 1 week later, I was scrolling through an industry newsletter during my lunch break, just keeping up with competitor news and market trends. Buried in the routine updates was a small anonymous leak about a major grocery chain proposal that was supposedly making waves in the industry. I started reading casually, then sat up straight in shock. The leak contained details that matched my planted fake document. Word for word, number for number. The anonymous source was being credited to Ridgewell, our biggest and most aggressive competitor. My hands actually trembled as I read the paragraph again, then a third time to make absolutely sure. There was simply no other possible explanation. Kayla had taken our confidential information, including my deliberately false planted detail, and fed it directly to our competition. And Dan had given her every password, every access code, every permission she needed to do it. I sat back in my desk chair, staring up at the fluorescent ceiling lights. I had suspected she was stealing from us. Now I had actual, traceable proof. But who would believe me? Dan certainly wouldn't listen. I made another decision. I needed to dig much deeper into Kayla's professional background. Late that night, long after I should have been asleep, I sat in bed with my laptop, systematically combing through LinkedIn profiles, old industry conference registries, and archived company website pages. I searched every variation of Kayla's name, cross-referenced her with Ridgewell, looked for any connection I could find. And then, finally, I found it. A photograph from an industry summit 2 years ago. The image showed a panel discussion about competitive market analysis. And there, standing in the background wearing a conference lanyard, was Kayla. The lanyard very clearly displayed Ridgewell's corporate logo. I zoomed in on the photo until the image pixelated. The caption at the bottom of the archive page listed her official role: Strategic Market Intelligence Team. My stomach turned over. Strategic Market Intelligence. That was just a polite corporate phrase for competitive espionage and information gathering. She hadn't just previously worked for Ridgewell in some innocent capacity. She'd been part of their dedicated team for researching and undermining their competitors. I saved the photo immediately and began cross-referencing it with other public records. There were small breadcrumbs everywhere, once I knew where to look. She'd scrubbed most of her digital history very carefully, but she hadn't caught everything. I now had documented proof that Kayla was directly connected to Ridgewell, had unrestricted access to our most sensitive information, and was actively leaking our confidential data to them. I knew exactly what I had to do next, even though I dreaded it. The next morning, I knocked firmly on Dan's office door. He waved me in without looking up from his phone, barely acknowledging my presence. I sat down in the chair across from his desk and methodically laid everything out, calmly and carefully, keeping my emotions completely in check. I showed him the conference photo with Kayla clearly wearing Ridgewell's identification. I explained the suspicious access logs. I described the leaked detail that had appeared in the industry newsletter. I showed him the email where she'd sent our pitch deck to her personal account. Dan, I genuinely think Kayla's working for Ridgewell. I think she was deliberately planted here to steal our proprietary information and sabotage the Northway deal. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he actually laughed, a short, dismissive sound. Riley, come on. You're clearly threatened because someone younger and sharper has joined the team. I understand feeling insecure, but you absolutely cannot sabotage her just because you feel replaced. My chest tightened painfully. This isn't about insecurity or feeling threatened. Please just look at the evidence I'm showing you. He waved his hand dismissively, already looking back at his phone. Kayla represents the future of this team. If you can't handle working with talented people, maybe you need to seriously rethink your place here. I stood up slowly, my hands shaking with suppressed anger. I'd given him a clear chance to see the truth. He had actively chosen his own ego over protecting the company. As I turned to walk out of his office, he called after me with that infuriating smugness in his voice. Learn from her while you still can, Riley. Kayla will be running this entire place soon enough. That sentence, more than anything else, helped me make my final decision. That night, I sat alone on my couch, staring at an old framed photo from my very first year at the company. I'd been so proud back then, so full of hope about building a meaningful career. 7 years later, I was being systematically erased and replaced by someone who was actively destroying everything I'd helped build. I opened my laptop and pulled up my resume. I hadn't updated it in years. It felt strange and sad, like I was betraying something important I'd created. But I wasn't the one doing the betraying here. I reached out to a few old professional contacts, people I'd worked with at previous jobs or met at conferences. By midnight, I had 3 promising responses, offering to connect me with opportunities at their companies. I didn't formally send my resignation letter yet, but I saved a complete draft on my phone, ready to go. The next morning, I walked into the office with a strange new sense of calm settling over me. I wasn't going to keep fighting for a place that clearly didn't value my loyalty or expertise. A few days later, Dan scheduled a 4 o'clock meeting with the vague title, Transition Planning Session. I knew exactly what it meant. He wanted me to formally and publicly hand over all my responsibilities to Kayla to make my demotion completely official in front of witnesses. I walked into that conference room with my resignation letter pulled up and ready on my phone. Dan sat at the head of the table looking satisfied. Kayla sat beside him, notepad open, looking professional and prepared. Let's make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone, Dan started in his practiced management voice. I cut him off before he could continue. I'm resigning, effective immediately. His face went completely blank with shock. What? What are you talking about? I'm not participating in this transition. I'm formally done with this company. His shock transformed rapidly into anger, his face flushing red. You're making an absolutely huge mistake. Riley, you won't find anything better than what you have here. You're throwing away your entire career. I stood up calmly, feeling lighter and freer than I had felt in weeks. I'll take my chances out there. I sent my official resignation email from my phone as I walked out of the conference room, not looking back. Minutes later, a company-wide notification appeared on everyone's screens. We had successfully reached the final round of the Northway Grocers contract negotiation. Our only remaining competitor in the final round? Ridgewell. My final 2 weeks at the company were strange and uncomfortable. I slowly boxed up my desk, saying quiet goodbyes to coworkers who looked at me with a mixture of pity and confusion. Meanwhile, Kayla's access and authority kept expanding daily. She was suddenly included in every single meeting, like copied on every important email, and given passwords to every system. Dan paraded her around the office like she was some kind of prize acquisition, constantly praising her ideas in front of everyone. One afternoon, I happened to walk past a small side office and heard Kayla on her phone. She wasn't trying to be particularly quiet or discreet. "With Riley gone, we can move much faster on everything," she said in a cold, transactional tone. Nothing at all like the friendly, warm act she performed in front of Dan and the rest of the team. I stopped in the hallway for just a moment, listening to confirm what I was hearing. Then I kept walking. I didn't confront her or try to record the conversation. I just made a mental note and kept packing my things. On my very last day, I cleaned out the final drawer of my desk and took one long look around the office that had been my professional home for 7 years. Part of me felt genuinely sad about leaving, but a much bigger part of me felt completely free. A month later, I was working at a smaller consulting firm across the city. The pay was noticeably less than my previous salary, but the work environment was dramatically healthier and more respectful. I didn't think much about my old job anymore until I received an automated industry alert on my phone one morning. Northway Grocers had officially announced their final decision. They had chosen Ridgewell as their operations partner. My stomach dropped as I clicked on the full article. The detailed write-up described Ridgewell's winning proposal using language that felt eerily, uncomfortably familiar. In fact, buried in the description was the exact fake vendor name and fabricated pricing structure that I had deliberately planted in that test document weeks ago. The false detail that only Kayla had accessed and downloaded. I sat back heavily in my chair, staring at my computer screen in disbelief. She had actually done it. She had systematically stolen our entire proposal, handed it directly to Ridgewell, and they had won the contract using our stolen work. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Becca, one of my old coworkers who I'd stayed friendly with. The message read, "Our board is completely losing it. They're convinced someone leaked the Northway proposal to the competition." I stared at the text for a long moment. Then I set my phone down without responding, feeling a dark, complicated sense of satisfaction slowly settle over me like a heavy blanket. Over the next several days, Becca continued sending me regular updates about the chaos unfolding at my former company. The board had immediately launched a comprehensive internal investigation. The IT department was systematically digging through access logs, email records, file downloads, and network activity. The legal team had gotten involved. Outside, consultants were being brought in. The atmosphere in the office was apparently tense and paranoid. "Everyone's pointing fingers at everyone else," Becca texted me. "Dan is absolutely freaking out. He's in emergency meetings constantly." Then came the detail that didn't surprise me at all. Something really weird. They can't find Kayla anywhere. Her company email is bouncing back. Her phone goes straight to voicemail. It's literally like she just disappeared into thin air. I wasn't surprised in the slightest. Of course, Kayla had vanished completely. She had successfully gotten exactly what she came for. The confidential intelligence, the detailed proposal, the contract win for Ridgewell. She had absolutely no reason to stick around and face any consequences. I imagined Dan pacing frantically around his office, finally realizing far too late what I had tried desperately to tell him weeks ago. The board was apparently asking very hard questions now. Who hired this woman? Who vetted her background? Who gave her unlimited access to our most sensitive files? And every single answer pointed directly back to Dan. My phone rang suddenly. It was a number I didn't recognize at all. I let it go to voicemail, then listened carefully. It was a lawyer from my old company asking if I would be willing to speak about my time working alongside Kayla. I sent over a carefully organized folder, screenshots of access logs, timestamps of downloads, the fake document I'd planted, and the email showing Kayla had exported it. I also included the conference photo linking her to Ridgewell's intelligence team. The lawyer went silent as she reviewed the files. Finally, she said, "This is very helpful. Thank you, Riley." A week later, Becca called me. You're not gonna believe this, she said, voice shaking. Kayla's cooperating with regulators. She's talking. Apparently, when Ridgewell realized the investigation was closing in, they'd cut Kayla loose to save themselves. And Kayla, facing potential legal consequences, decided to confess. She admitted everything. She'd been hired by Ridgewell specifically to infiltrate our company, gather intel, and sabotage the Northway deal. She confessed to accessing files, forwarding documents, and feeding competitive details back to her handlers. But here's the part that made my heart race. She also admitted that Dan was the one who made it all possible. She said she'd targeted his ego, flattered him, fed him ideas he could take credit for, and he'd given her access to everything without a single background check. The board's conclusion was swift. Kayla was guilty, but Dan was responsible and he was done. Becca texted me a few days later. They're terminating Dan. No severance, no references, nothing. I read the message twice, letting it sink in. Dan Mercer, the man who dismissed me, humiliated me, and ignored every warning I gave him, was being fired. He'd lost everything because he'd trusted the wrong person and pushed away the right one. I didn't feel joy exactly. Just a quiet, cold sense of justice. He'd built his downfall himself. I'd just been smart enough to step out of the way. That evening, I got a message from someone I didn't expect. A contact at Northway Grocers. Hi, Riley. I've been following what happened at your old firm. I was impressed by your integrity and the way you handled things. If you're open to it, I'd love to discuss a consulting opportunity. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. The client Dan had lost was reaching out to me. Over the next few months, my life shifted in ways I hadn't imagined. I started taking on freelance clients, including Northway. My reputation as someone who saw problems before they exploded began to spread quietly through the industry. People who'd worked with me at my old firm reached out, asking if I was available for projects. I wasn't making as much money as I had before, but I was building something that felt mine. No Dan taking credit. No fake smiles in meetings, just my work, my name, my results. One afternoon, Becca sent me a photo. It showed Dan's office door at the old company, wide open, empty. Nameplate removed. The space where he used to sit was being repurposed. He was gone, erased, just like he'd tried to erase me. I stared at the photo for a long time, remembering everything. I thought back to that first morning in the conference room, seeing Kayla sitting in my seat. I remembered the sting of that cheap cake with my name spelled wrong. The humiliation of being told I'd help with the transition to my own replacement. I thought about the late nights I'd spent documenting her behavior, planting that fake detail, gathering proof that no one wanted to believe. And I thought about Dan's face when I told him I was resigning. The shock, the anger, the arrogance. He'd truly believed I needed him more than he needed me. He'd thought Kayla was an upgrade, a sharper, shinier version of the reliable worker he'd taken for granted for 7 years. He didn't realize he was replacing his greatest asset with the person who would destroy him. And by the time he figured it out, it was too late. I hadn't needed revenge. I just needed to step aside and let the truth do its work. Now, sitting in my quiet home office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. I wasn't fighting for validation anymore. I wasn't begging to be seen. I was building a life where my work spoke for itself, where my reputation was mine to shape. Dan lost his title, his credibility, his safety net. Kayla lost her freedom and her career. And me? I lost a toxic job and gained something far more valuable, my dignity, my independence, my future. I opened my laptop and saw a new email from a potential client. The subject line read, "Interested in your strategic consulting services." I smiled. This was my life now, built on my terms, no one else's, and it felt right. I glanced at the photo Becca had sent one more time, the empty office, the missing nameplate. Then I closed it and went back to my work. He thought he brought in my replacement. He just didn't realize I was already done letting him own my future. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that conference room, the fluorescent lights, the crooked cake, Kayla's calculated smile, Dan's smug announcement. It's strange how one moment can change everything. But it wasn't really one moment, was it? It was 7 years of being overlooked. 7 years of watching someone else take credit, 7 years of waiting for fairness that never came. The difference was, I finally stopped waiting. I stopped hoping Dan would see my value. I stopped believing loyalty would be rewarded. I took my evidence, my dignity, and my future, and I walked away. And in doing so, I let them destroy themselves. People ask me sometimes if I regret not fighting harder, not exposing Kayla sooner, not forcing Dan to listen. But I don't. Because the truth found its way to the surface without me having to scream it. And now I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Free, respected, in control. That's not revenge. That's justice. And it feels perfect. I don't check up on Dan anymore. I don't wonder what happened to Kayla after her confession. I don't need those answers. What I needed was to reclaim my worth, to prove to myself that I could survive without them. And I did more than survive. I thrived. That conference room moment 7 years in the making taught me the most important lesson. Never wait for someone else to see your value. Know it yourself, protect it fiercely, and walk away from anyone who can't recognize it. Because in the end, they're not replacing you. They're just revealing who they really are. And that revelation? That's their loss, not yours.